Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome back to F1 Dive and to the race recap for the 2021 Portuguese Grand Prix. Now, since this is the first recap video, what we do is we put the race in kind of a story mode, so you don't have to watch the race and get the essence of what happened in the race. And we have more detail than the highlights that Formula 1 uploads, but obviously less detail than watching the race itself. Before we get started, let me remind you to hit that subscribe button and like the video. After 2 rounds of amazing racing both at the top and the midfield, all F1 fans were looking forward to yet another show between the Red Bull and the Mercedes. And after Hamilton won the battle for pole back in Imola and Verstappen put up a flawless drive to take the checkered flag for P1, all eyes were on these two. And just as soon as we thought that this will be a two-way battle for pole in Portimao, we saw a familiar yet welcome sight. Valtteri Bottas reminding everybody that he's still here and he's still able to beat the best on his day, denying Sir Lewis Hamilton his 100th pole in the process. Bottas took the pole and the whole midfield was scattered from 6th to 17th. The Red Bull boys, lacking confidence in the car, were 3rd and 4th, but were optimistic for the race, and we were all set for an exciting Sunday. But before the Sunday, there was a storyline going on. The biggest plot going into the race was that Valtteri has done well to get the first 50%. He needed to convert that pole position into a race win, and that in itself was going to be a very tall task. You see, Bottas had problems with his race starts last year. He had been eaten up by Hamilton either in the opening laps or in the race. Hamilton himself has the ability to have great starts, not to mention Max Verstappen, who won in Imola starting P3, and he had to win on Sunday. So Bottas at any cost had to retain his first place on Sunday if he wanted to win. He had to win on Sunday to announce his title challenge like he has been claiming. Come Sunday, at lights out, we saw Valtteri get a good start and was able to hold position after turn 1, protecting against Lewis, who had a decent start himself. Max wasn't far behind from the Mercedes pair as his teammate Perez lost position to the Chile master himself, Carlos Sainz. Here we see how the tyre choice was going to affect the race. Since this was going to be a one-stop race, the tyre choice was absolutely essential, and Ferrari had made the decision to send Sainz out on the softs, which allowed him to overtake Checo for P4. Just behind the Red Bull, Ocon, continuing his good form, was able to get past Norris for P6. But this is Lando Norris we're talking about. He wasn't having any of it and he took back the position the very next turn. Further down the grid, Norris' teammate Daniel Ricciardo, who had started 16th, gained 2 positions on the opening lap. After the first lap, we were ready for the second, but Kimi Raikkonen, who had made 2 places himself, was in the tail of his teammate. So you see, in Portimao, the headwind down the pit straight was very strong, something Lewis also touched upon before the race. And the same headwind, along with the slipstream, caught out Raikkonen and he touched the back of his teammate Giovinazzi. And that was the end of the race for the Iceman. Raikkonen's misfortune brought out the full safety car, and when the safety car was ending, all eyes were on the top 3, who were running very close even before the safety car. Here is where Valtteri Bottas showed his sly fin inside of him. See, look at his race start really close. He grouped the pack together so Verstappen can be as close to Hamilton as possible, and because there's no overtaking before the start-finish line, he accelerated just before, allowing him to create a big enough gap from Lewis and leaving Lewis compromised to Supermax behind him. And Supermax, always the opportunist, overtook Lewis going through turn 1 that very lap. While all this was unfolding on the same lap, Sergio Perez, just behind the top 3, was able to overtake Carlos Sainz, who didn't have a good restart. And Carlos Sainz, after being overtaken by Sergio Perez, was overtaken by his former teammate Lando Norris. Now let's talk about Lando Norris for a bit. Norris has been showing great starts and having his elbows out at every race, and couple turns after Norris overtook his former teammate, he showed great pace and got past Sergio Perez for P4. So Perez, while he overtook Carlos Sainz for P4, got overtaken by Lando Norris himself and stayed 5th. Talking about bad starts, Esteban Ocon, who had lost his place to Lando Norris formerly, but the Frenchman has never been one to back down, and he took back the position momentarily, but he had a formidable opponent in Charles Leclerc, because Charles Leclerc on the next turn overtook Ocon very decisively indeed. Meanwhile, while all this carnage was happening, Ricciardo climbed back to P12 from 16th, and it didn't take much time for him to overtake Russell. Russell, who was struggling with the wind and was losing downforce while following, eventually dropped back to P15 on the same lap. Enough talk about the back markers, let's come back to the top, to the main plot. We are at lap 9 at this point, and the top 3 are within 1.2 seconds of each other. Verstappen is just under half a second from the leader, and it looks like he may catch up to Bottas. But just before the pit straight, coming into turn 14, Max loses grip for a second, and that second was what Hamilton needed. If this was at any other part of the circuit, he may have been able to hang on, but this was down the straight. He just didn't have enough speed, and Lewis had more speed than Verstappen along with DRS assistance. And Hamilton was ahead of Max before the end of the straight. A little mistake had cost Max dearly, and the good work that he had put in at lap 9 was spoiled by the time lap 11 came around. Verstappen trying to go through the inside of Lewis at turn 4 on the same lap. Verstappen wasn't taking it lying down. He tried to go through the inside of Lewis at turn 4, but his efforts did not return a reward. This is where the tide turned towards Hamilton. Lap by lap, Hamilton was cutting out Valtteri's lead. Lewis clearly had much better race pace than Bottas. But back to the subplot for a second. Sergio Perez was eventually able to overtake Lando Norris for P4, but the damage had been done for Checo because he was 9 seconds behind the top 3 party and he didn't have an invitation. Meanwhile, Daniel Ricciardo, who had started down in 16th, was now able to overtake Sebastian Vettel for P10 to get into the points, going from 16th to 10th by only lap 18. And just 2 laps later in the top 3, Hamilton was able to overtake Valtteri Bottas for P1. Verstappen wasn't too far off from the top 2, in P3 only 1.5 seconds behind, and getting closer to Bottas as each lap passed by. Lap 21 was where the pit stop was open and Carlos Sainz and Ferrari were the first one to pull the trigger. Now this will get very relevant later on, after continuous laps of Max being in Bottas's DRS, but weirdly not able to get close enough for an overtake. Max was called into the pits for an undercut attempt. Max was put on hards with a quick pit stop from Red Bull, and Bottas had to come in the very next lap. This was going to be very close. Bottas was able to come out a little bit ahead of Verstappen, but he didn't have his tyres up to temperature and didn't have the pace that Verstappen did. In the process, Verstappen was ahead of Bottas in no time. Hamilton also came in for his pit stop on the next lap, and Sergio Perez was running first. In a very confusing stunt, Perez was ordered to stay out, which in my opinion made little to no sense. But now let's return to the midfield again for a second. Now this is around lap 35. Remember when I told you that the tyre strategy will be relevant later on? This is it. There were 2 basic strategies in the midfield. Those who started in the top 10 were put on softs and then eventually on the mediums, except for Esteban Ocon. And those who were behind them, namely Ricciardo and Alonso, were made to go long on the mediums, and after going long on the mediums, teams would traditionally put on the soft tyre. But all teams were looking closely at Esteban Ocon, who had put on the hards. Esteban Ocon with the hard tyres was flying at the moment, overtaking Pierre Gasly in no time. This saw a change in strategy for Ricciardo and Alonso. Instead of putting on the soft tyre after the mediums, they were put on hards and showed great pace. Ricciardo overtook Gasly and Sainz but was overtaken by Alonso, who had better pace. The Spaniard was having a great race, climbing from P15 to P8 in the end. This resulted in the running order of the midfield at lap 64 being Norris at 5th, followed by Leclerc on hards, Ocon on hards, Alonso on hards, Ricciardo on hards, and Sainz on the mediums was P10, followed closely by Gasly at P11. But the Frenchman, not one to back down, fought hard and was eventually able to overtake Sainz for one solitary point. It was clear from the running order that the hard tyre was the way to go. This was the biggest plot point of the race, the tyre strategy. Daniel Ricciardo, Esteban Ocon and Fernando Alonso saw great success putting on the hard tyre and eventually ended up 7th for Ocon, 8th for Alonso and 9th for Daniel Ricciardo. The battle on the top fizzled out eventually. It looked like there may be a battle between Max and Lewis, but Lewis clearly had superior race pace, and in a bid to get the fastest lap, Bottas and Verstappen came into the pits, but the fastest lap battle was won by Bottas. And finally, at lap 66, kind of an anti-climax, consistent Lewis Hamilton was able to keep Supermax at bay, and he came in to finish the race and claim his 97th victory in F1. In the end, the finishing order was Lewis Hamilton in P1, followed by Max Verstappen, Valtteri Bottas, Sergio Perez, Lando Norris, who had great pace in his McLaren and put out a good performance to get his third top 5 finish. Charles Leclerc, being his consistent self, climbed back from 8th on the grid to 6th. Esteban Ocon, as mentioned before, was flying on his hards, ended up at 7th place after a very bad start. Fernando Alonso and Daniel Ricciardo were actually the standout performances of the race in my opinion. Fernando Alonso climbed back from 14th and Daniel Ricciardo from 16th on the grid to end up in 8th and 9th. Pierre Gasly didn't have great pace in his Alpha Tauri Honda, but still fought back, fought hard and was able to get one solitary point. Carlos Sainz, I think in my opinion, pitted way too early and just couldn't make use of the mediums and ended up outside of points at P11. Antonio Giovinazzi, actually not bad from Antonio Giovinazzi, and ending up in P12 after qualifying at the same place. Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin were nowhere in the race because Aston Martin didn't have any pace and ended up 13th and 14th respectively. The rookie Yuki Tsunoda ended up in P15. Again, not too bad from him because he's a rookie. I think we can excuse his P15. George Russell, having problems with the car, ended up at 16th, fighting the car the whole race. Mick Schumacher actually put up a great performance to overtake Nicholas Latifi. Kind of an interesting battle between those two. And Mick Schumacher eventually came out at the top and ended up in P17, followed by Nicholas Latifi in P18 and Nikita Mazepin, the idiot, ending up at P19, around 50 seconds behind Nicholas Latifi. So not a good performance from him. And Kimi Raikkonen ended up having a DNF after his first lap touch with Antonio Giovinazzi. So that was the running order of the race. Now, even though there was a lot of activity in the race, it turned out to be quite boring in my opinion. But we can't be spoiled too much, right? We had 2 excellent races and now kind of a boring one. And with Spain just next weekend, I think Spain is not going to be interesting also. And alright guys, that's it. That was the story recap of the Portuguese Grand Prix. Now, this race didn't have much of a story going on for it, so that's why I had very scarce source material. But these videos are gonna be improving every weekend, so stay tuned for it. Subscribe to the channel if you like the video, hit that like button, and stay tuned for the preview of the Spanish Grand Prix. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.